You are listening to in streaming, not pleading. Fauci pled the fifth today, but you are streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte, always delighted to be in conversation with Bishop Joseph W. Tolton. He is the founder of Interconnected Justice. He's also the former senior advisor for religious and global affairs at the U.S. State Department. And he is with us to help break down some of the biggest trending news today. Bishop, welcome to the show.
It is always good to be with you, Dr. Nee. Welcome to your streaming platform.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Well, I gave away the ghost. I want to start with Dr. Anthony Fauci, who was making some big waves on Capitol Hill today. For folks who are less familiar, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he sat in front of Senator Rand Paul's committee today and declined to answer a single question, invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Dr. Fauci said that, quote, although it pains me to do so because of the respect I have for the legislative branch, under the advice of my attorney, he would not testify. Senator Paul, who has long accused Dr. Fauci of covering up COVID's origins, announced the committee will vote next week on whether to hold Fauci in contempt. Bishop, I want to get your read on this. Is this about legitimate accountability, or is this a 4-year victory lap for a senator who's been chasing this man since the pandemic?
I have to say that, as Dr. Fauci said, that this was painful for him. It was equally painful for anybody who had to watch. His face was so tight. He was obviously disgusted with the proceedings that he was being put through. And I just can't imagine what the Republicans think was distilled out of these hearings that is actually relevant to what Americans have on their mind. I think it's remarkable to me that we're moving back to this continued politicization of the COVID era when Americans are asking, can I afford groceries? Can I afford rent? What about healthcare? And here we go. I mean, ultimately, justice requires truth and not perpetual vengeance. Oversight strengthens democracy, but retribution weakens it. And this is just nothing more than an extension of Trump's retribution campaign. And the fact that they would go along with this, considering that the midterms are looming, is kind of stupefying to me.
Joining us now, Richard A. Fowler, Fox News contributor and contributing writer to Forbes.com. Richard, from inside conservative media, do rank and file Republicans actually still care about COVID's origins in 2026? Or is this just more useful as a symbol than as a live political issue?
Well, listen, I think it depends on who was watching that hearing and how they wanted to come out. And I thought what we saw from the senator from Ohio, when he said the quiet part out loud, I hope that, voters see this. I hope this is clipped and turned into advertising. And I think for those folks who aren't in the political day-to-day, so if you're not listening to this show, and if you listen to this show, you should continue listening, right? But if you're not listening to this show and you were somebody who thought, maybe, just maybe, school should have opened a week or two earlier, or maybe, just maybe, your kid missed their graduation or their prom, and you feel there's a wrong that was done. What this hearing, from the conservative perspective, and I'm not a conservative, I just speak conservative well, what they were trying to achieve was there were some major misses that happened during the pandemic, and because now we have, Dr. Fauci's diary, we're able to tease this out in a sort of bloodlusty way to make the argument that there were major errors made by the quote unquote system. And so you should, push back against the system, thus vote for us. Now, will that work? We're going to have to wait to see until, this midterm elections in 90 some odd days. But I think that was their larger goal, to take you back to 2020 and say, here were some of the mistakes made. Here's the guy who we believe made it, and think about all the things that you missed as a result of it. And this could have been avoided. This is what the argument they were trying to make. Now, was that successful? We're going to have to see what the audience thinks.
Well, speaking of the audience, Bishop, is there a moral difference between a public servant like Dr. Fauci protecting himself legally and a public servant hiding wrongdoing? And can the public even tell those apart when the answer is silence either way?
Well, there certainly is a difference. And no, in fact, how can the public tell when there is complete silence coming from Dr. Fauci? But obviously, as he repeated time and time again, his legal counsel believes that it is in his best interest to plead the fifth, because he understands how easily his answers can be misconstrued and manipulated. And, you know, this is really real for a public servant who is one of the most important doctors in his field. I mean, the work that he's done historically around HIV and AIDS, the importance of his contributions to contributing to the upholding of medical systems around the world via USAID have been first rate. But yet this public servant who has given, I think, so much to our country has to protect himself, because the impending threat on the other side is jail time. I mean, we're not talking about some kind of punishment that is reasonable or just critique in the public square, but this is literally a threat to him actually having to serve prison time. I think that anybody with the most sincere intentions and dedicated record of service would have to default to protecting oneself in this kind of a critical moment and context.
Richard, let's talk about the timing of this. Fauci testified voluntarily over 200 times during his tenure, and is choosing silence now, post-retirement, post-Biden pardon. What does the timing tell you about, you know, this particular plot twist, this latest plot twist in the COVID story?
Well, I mean, I think this is very clearly, you know, sort of the motive of Senator Rand Paul. He's been after Anthony Fauci since the beginning of this pandemic. I think the motive here was to bring the pandemic back into this election cycle and to once again, copy and paste what I just previously said, bring it into the cycle for all the folks who felt that maybe, just maybe, there were things that weren't done perfectly during a global pandemic, right? That caused family members themselves to miss out on jobs, miss out on opportunities, and to sort of put this into the main, to put this in, I don't even think it's going to be in the spotlight, because I think, to the bishop's point, rent, housing, the price of gas is currently in the spotlight. That's center stage. But at least to make this a sideshow. Here's a sideshow. Remember this, remember that this happened to you. This is the reason why you should reject the people that are protecting him. That's, I think, the frame that they're trying to set up. How successful that frame will be, we're going to have to wait to see. But remember, when audience members who didn't watch this hearing see the clip, all they will see is, you know, a senator asking Anthony Fauci a very direct question about the pandemic. It might be a very above board question about the pandemic, and him saying, I plead the fifth. They're not going to see his explanation at the top. They're not going to see his lawyer try to provide a rigorous defense. They're just going to see a question from a senator. It might even be a Democratic senator. And they're going to see pleading the fifth. And then they're going to have to say, think about where they were in 2020 and think about, did this impact my life? And that's the frame Republicans are trying to set up today.
Well, so moving along to another frame that Republicans are trying very hard to set up, at least 9 schools across Florida, Georgia, and Colorado will have storage boxes housing plastic, non-lethal drones from a company called Campus Guardian Angel, made by Austin-based Mithril Defense. These drones can reach a shooter within 15 seconds, blaring sirens, flashing strobes, spraying pepper gel, or ramming a target at up to 60 miles per hour. The company's founder says that the Uvalde massacre, where police waited over an hour to engage, inspired the project. Now, I want to sit with this for a second, because we're so far down the road of accepting gun violence in schools as a permanent fixture of American life that our solution has become drone warfare in elementary hallways, borrowed straight from the Ukraine battlefield instead of just passing gun laws that already exist in every other wealthy nation on earth. Bishop, as a faith leader, what does it say about us as a country that we've normalized militarizing hallways instead of restricting the weapons that make hallways dangerous in the first place?
The wealthiest country in the world is now debating which robot should protect children, instead of how to stop children from needing protection. And this, as a human being, as an American citizen, as a pastor, and particularly as an African American, is an incredibly sad story to me. But I also think that it is incredibly revealing in that racism will not allow America to have a sane gun policy. And here's where it is clear that there is something deeply spiritually wrong with our country that allows us to produce a society where we're willing, and particularly those on the conservative side, are willing to put their own children at risk instead of actually embracing gun policies that make sense. They are so committed to gun culture, which certainly has a racist ethos at its center, but they are so committed to that, more so than they are actually protecting their own children. This is something that I will never be able to understand. And as a pastor, it makes me deeply sad. And I call on voices like Joel Osteen and other members of the conservative Christian right to stand up and actually take a far more sane position. And I lift up his name just because so much of this centers around what has happened in Texas. And he, among others, have just been silent here. And that's sad and tragic and unchristian.
Richard, you are not conservative. You speak conservative. And so I'm going to ask you this. Is there a conservative case against this kind of technology, or does the market-driven, harden the target approach fit comfortably within how the right generally responds to gun violence?
I think this speaks for what you're going to see from elected officials, but I do think the silence of Joel Osteen and others is very intentional. And I think the reason why that silence is intentional is because for a very long time, we've seen the right hold at its core the protection of gun rights, even if it comes at the cost of children, and the shattering of what's supposed to be a safe and welcoming and thriving place, a public school, or for that case, a religious school. We've seen multiple religious schools now come under attack from gun violence. And there's an unwillingness for them to move. And at the moment when I realized that there was no movement going to happen, what was going to happen was when we saw the Sandy Hook parents, upper middle class, white parents, go to Capitol Hill, talk to upper middle class, white and rich senators and say, this is happening to me, which means this is happening to you. Do something. And they were unwilling. That should have told you everything you needed to know about that.
Bishop, in 30 seconds, 20 years from now, when we look back at this moment, do you think historians treat pepper spray drones as innovation or as a monument to what Congress refused to do?
At the end of your question, that 20 years from now, we'll look at this as
a monument to what Congress refused to do?
Well, absolutely. There's no question about this. This does also lean into the impotence that Congress has certainly expressed under Mike Johnson's leadership. There's absolutely no question about that.
You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. More would come forward with Bishop Joseph W. Tolton of Interconnected Justice. And for those of you on IG, you may want to catch the Brothers Briefing. They're going live with Richard A. Fowler in a short bit. So when we're on commercial, right, you can check him out, but then you come on back. You're listening to A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. You are listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dr. Nii-Quartelai Corte. He is Bishop Joseph W. Tolton, founder of Interconnected Justice, also former senior advisor for religious and global affairs at the U.S. State Department. Bishop Tolton is the right one. You the right one to help us try and make sense out of this. A sitting Supreme Court justice pushes back on Christian nationalism. Let's get into it. This item appeared in my feed, in my social media feed. And right away, I knew exactly who I wanted to talk to about this, being that you, Bishop, are one of the most celebrated experts in Christian nationalism. And so, it's important that we use this as a jumping off point, regardless of the specific. There's a real organized push in this country to rewrite the founding as explicitly Christian, and it's colliding with the country that's more religiously diverse than it's ever been. Where do you come down on this as a person of faith, Bishop? Does the Christian nation, quote unquote, framing, does it actually serve the gospel, or does it distort it for political ends?
Oh, there's no question that America perceiving itself as a Christian nation distorts the truth of the history of this country. And if the history of this country is an embodiment of Christianity, then clearly that reality is a distortion of the gospel, because we have not lived up to that truth. And what's interesting and fascinating to me about this story is two things. One is what it reveals about Christian nationalism and the fact that we know democracy protects faith, but Christian nationalism seeks to politicize it. And it is a movement that obviously has gained tremendous momentum, that the governing idea of that movement is that Christian values and Christian ideas and Christians themselves need to really have rulership and dominion over our country. But one of the other things that's so fascinating, Dr. Nee, about this ruling is the fact that it's Gorsuch, who's one of the more conservative justices, along with Thomas and Alito, who actually rejects the notion that we are a Christian nation by our founding. And I think it's important for your audience for us to kind of tease out a little bit about what distinguishes Gorsuch from Thomas and Alito. Gorsuch is probably the strongest textualist when it comes to looking at the Constitution, in terms of really asking the question, what did it mean to the writers, what thus and so has been said? And so for him, because the text itself gives no constitutional establishment to America as a Christian nation, but quite the opposite. Article 6, the First Amendment, states no religious test, no establishment of religion. And so for Gorsuch, if you're a textualist, you cannot invent a Christian founding that the Constitution itself refuses to create or refuses to display. So it's really interesting in terms of the difference between him and Alito and Thomas. Alito and Thomas, their reading of the text comes more through historical traditionalism, and they look to longstanding practices and majoritarian traditions to inform their understanding of the text, where Gorsuch seeks to have more kind of a cleaner understanding of the text. And this is why in cases that involve Native Americans suing for land or for their rights or for their treaties to actually be enforced, you'll always find Gorsuch in the affirmative, again, because he believes that this is what the text speaks to. So it's really interesting in terms of just understanding the Supreme Court unto itself to kind of understand those nuances and distinctions. But the bigger conversation which you've introduced us to is the momentum of Christian nationalism, the ethos of Christian nationalism, and how it really does undermine the very fundamental idea and ideals of our democracy. And I will say that certainly I support Justice Gorsuch here, and I think that he's come to clearly the correct conclusion.
Oh, wow. I mean, look, that's quite a statement coming from you, especially given that, you lead work at the intersection of faith and justice. It's not faith or justice, it's faith and justice. And so talk to me about how you respond to fellow Christians who genuinely believe that reclaiming a quote unquote Christian nation identity is a form of moral restoration, not moral exclusion.
The problem with that is that there is an assumption that the Christian faith is absolute and supreme, and that we therefore have to look to it for our moral guidance. That is on a direct collision course with the very idea that we are a society whose constitution promotes and almost demands pluralism. We cannot have religious pluralism if we are going to exalt the specific tenets and doctrinal ideas of one faith versus the other. We as a society since our founding have principles and ideas and ideals that govern us and that inform our laws and our policies. There's definitely that relationship. But those ideas, we cannot sieve them solely through the Christian faith, but we have to do that in a way that allows for pluralism to really flourish, because the protection of minority rights, minority religious rights, was so very fundamental to the core founding of our nation. So I say no to my Christian friends who are dominionists, who want to exalt Christian doctrine as the idea that must inform our politics and our policies and our laws. And I push back and say it is actually shared values that come from a diversity of faiths that must inform our laws and our policies and our values.
Bishop, I'm a Black Christian. You're a Black Christian. There are a lot of our leaders, learners, and listeners, though not everyone, that are Black Christians in America. And we know that Black Christianity in America has its own complicated relationship with the country that used Scripture to justify slavery and later drew on it to fight for liberation. Talk to us about how does that history shape how you hear even the words Christian nation? How does it shape how you hear Christian nation rhetoric today?
It's such a fascinating question, because one of the things that the church has not been able to do is be very honest about the fact that we found Christianity in the midst of oppression. We have been conscripted into this movement that exalts the Bible as being absolute and inerrant. And because it is absolute and inerrant, it cannot be questioned. So we all are oriented as Black Christians to be protectors of the Scriptures, even when we are protecting ideas and thoughts that come from the Scriptures that actually undermine the productivity and the prosperity of our own communities. And so we have a very a very bipolar, as it were, relationship with the Scriptures. And one thing that's happening now generationally is you've got younger people, Generation Z, who are clearly questioning our embrace of the Scriptures as being inerrant, and they are challenging the Scriptures, and they are challenging the old generation to rethink how wedded we are to the Scriptures as textualists. And it's actually rather fascinating, because we support a theory around the Constitution of understanding it as a lived document, but yet when it comes to the Scriptures, we've been oriented to become textualists. And that's a tension that I think Black Americans are working through. And again, it's becoming a very interesting intergenerational tug of war.
Well, speaking of tug of war, I want to transition to a story that is giving a lot of people on Capitol Hill and beyond a little bit of adula. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina introduced a resolution that would ban any congressional group, quotes, formed primarily or substantially on the basis of race, color, ethnicity, or national origin, which would eliminate, that's right, you guessed it, the Congressional Black Caucus, the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, and the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus in one swing. Representative Mace called these caucuses federally sanctioned segregation. Democratic leadership co-signed a blistering response, calling Mace's move racist, and noting that the CBC traces back to 1969 and formally adopted its name in 1971, more than half a century of advocacy that Mace wants gone with a single resolution. Bishop, you do justice work across communities. What's your read on this bill that conveniently only seems to target caucuses representing people of color while leaving dozens of other identity-based caucuses untouched?
I think it's important for us to first backtrack and visit history. After Reconstruction, we saw a plethora of Black infrastructure being built: Black churches, Black colleges, Black newspapers, Black fraternities and civil rights organization, congressional representation, even in the Senate. It was then coming after another wave of progress for us, the civil rights movement, that we saw the establishment of the Congressional Black Caucus, which was established to be a part of democratic infrastructure. It institutionalized Black political power in in the face of a period of time, Jim Crow, where Black political power essentially was illegal. So with that understanding, we can now speak to what the Congresswoman is suggesting. Now, she, of course, is saying, I don't oppose Black people. And to your point, she's saying that this is really about institutional or government-sanctioned segregation. The issue with that is that this ignores constitutional history. And now we can go back to the case recently decided around voting, around birthright citizenship, in which Justice Thomas voted against birthright citizenship because he argued that the 14th Amendment specifically was speaking about the condition of slaves and those born as slaves. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson hit him very hard and said very clearly, this is remarkable to me that you now read race into the Constitution when your whole kind of theory as a justice is that the Constitution is race is race neutral or race blind. And so taking us back to what Mace is suggesting, what she is ignoring is that the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, exists because Congress historically excluded Black Americans from meaningful participation. And this is not about racial preference. It is about how can Black people be a part of an institution that is supposed to be representative. And that is the power of the Congressional Black Caucus. It represents a bona fide constituency who has been iced out of political power for many, many, many years. I do think it's interesting that no major Republican leadership rallied around the proposal, at least not publicly. So she was left a little bit kind of flying out there in the wind. It might have been a test balloon to kind of see what the reaction and the response was. But it does say something very, very important about the thinking of the Republican Party right now. They are clear that the destruction of Black political power is necessary for minority rule, and it is necessary for the authoritarian project to succeed.
That's right. In light of that, if you were advising CBC leadership on how to respond to this, Bishop, beyond a joint statement, what would a real counter strategy look like, at least top lines?
I would hope that the Congressional Black Caucus would join Reverend Al Sharpton and Dr. Martin Luther King's oldest son on August the 28th, or that weekend, when they have a rally, which of course celebrates the historic March on Washington. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for the CBC to be seen, to be visible, to even make some statements about why they exist, what their existence has meant and does mean, even in the face of the Shelby case, where we know the possibilities of representation among Black Congress people in the South is really going to be challenged. I think all of those things need to be tied together in a really sexy, can I say, presentation from the CBC, explaining the value of their existence, particularly for our younger generations who might not have such a precise and emotional connection to the value of the Congressional Black Caucus.
In our remaining minutes, Trump administration formally asked the Supreme Court to allow nationwide implementation of an executive order tightening mail-in voting rules ahead of the November midterms, after a federal appeals court upheld a block on the order, finding that it would sow confusion and threaten disenfranchisement of many eligible voters. The order would require states to hand over voter rolls and could restrict Postal Service mail ballots delivery to states that comply. The Supreme Court has ordered the 23 mostly Democratic-led states challenging the order to respond by August 3rd. In about 60 seconds, Bishop, when you connect this to the earlier story on the Congressional Black Caucus and the Christian nationalism fight, do you see a common thread running through today's stories about who gets to define and who fully belongs in this democracy?
Well, that is the defining thread. This story is not about the mail. Mace's story is not really about the CBC, but it really is about who has access to democracy and who actually can control democracy. This is very much so what this is all about. You know, last month, the Supreme Court upheld the state's authority to count ballots that arrive after Election Day if they're mailed on time under state law. And that decision reflected deference to state election rules rather than imposing a single federal standard. My hope is obviously that we'll see the Supreme Court follow that very same logic. But to your question, as I conclude here, this is really about who controls the levers of power. It always goes back to power. If you have a problem with states' rights when the outcome is one that you disagree with, you were never for states' rights. You were always interested in nothing more than power.
That's absolutely right. And we're watching the real-time scaffolding going up in an effort to build an apartheid state.
Yes.
You said it earlier when you talked about minority rule. That is the North Star, right? They know the demographics aren't on their side, and so they are moving quick, fast, and in a hurry to change the rules. That's what this is. And so don't let anybody let you think that your vote doesn't matter, because they would not be working so hard in overdrive to try and scuttle your vote, to make it more difficult for you to vote, to make your vote not count. Go ahead. Go ahead, Bishop.
No, I'm good.
I was just going to say, you've been listening to and streaming A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. When we come forward, there's a story coming out of Watts that we must tell you about. You're listening to A More Perfect Union on KBLA Talk 1580. Thank you, Bishop.
So good to be with you.
Always.